My name is Luke Blomberg. Please remain standing for the reading of God's word. We will be in Matthew 6:19 through 24. Do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Please be seated.
You guys ready to talk about money? One thing people in the auditorium and the person on stage have in common is that you don't want me to talk about money, and I don't want to talk about money either. But Jesus wants to talk about money, and so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. You know, when we started the Sermon on the Mount series, we talked about how this is Jesus' most famous teaching. It's his longest teaching in the New Testament, and in this, he's showing us what life is like in his kingdom. If you are going to live and say, Jesus is king, I'm going to follow him, I want to experience the life that Jesus has for me, then this teaching from Jesus is us getting to learn what that is and what it looks like. And one of the things we said early on was that it's going to get personal. You know, Jesus doesn't just stick to the subjects that are appropriate for discussing in polite company. He talks about the things that are most personal, that are hardest, the things that we kind of try to keep to ourselves, and money is certainly one of those things. And so Jesus is going to talk about our checkbook this morning, and I'm excited for what he has to say, because this is one of those teachings from Jesus that is so radical. He's going to confront something that is really just how almost everybody lives. And what he's going to say in particular this morning is that you believe things that aren't true, okay? Jesus is going to say this morning that most of us are insane. And I'm only slightly joking. Okay, here's what insanity means. This is the actual definition. Unlike popular opinion, it is not doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That everybody says that. That's not what it is. Insanity is a mental illness of such a severe nature that a person cannot distinguish fantasy from reality. Now, Jesus is not literally saying that you have a mental illness, but what he is saying is that when it comes to money, most of us cannot distinguish the difference between fantasy and reality. We live our whole lives believing things to be true about money that just simply are not true. And the reality of money that Jesus is going to tell us this morning, most of us refuse to accept as the truth. And so as we read this passage this morning, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, as simply as I can, point out the fantasy that Jesus is saying that we all believe, and point out the reality that he's inviting us to live into, and then together we can ask the question, okay, if Jesus is right, what does that actually mean for our lives? So let's begin. If you have your Bibles, keep them open to Matthew chapter 6, and this is how Jesus begins in verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. And we need to just stop right here, because this statement on its own is just right away incredibly radical. Jesus is saying, don't store up for yourselves treasures here on earth, which is what we all do all the time, right? I mean, if you have a job, if you earn any kind of money, I'm certain that you are storing up for yourself some amount of treasure. And by the way, that's basically unavoidable. So it's not right to read this as a legalistic teaching that it is sinful for you to have $10 in your bank account. But what Jesus is getting at is a heart attitude here, is a way of life, a way of living that is in pursuit of storing up for yourself money, possessions, stuff, experiences. And again, this is how almost everyone lives. And Jesus is saying, in my kingdom, I actually don't want you to do this very normal thing. What Jesus is putting his finger on is the fantasy that we all live in, and here's what it is. The fantasy is that the more money I get, the more satisfied I will be. It's the lie that almost all of us believe subconsciously, is that if we had significantly more than we have right now, our lives would be significantly better. Did anybody follow the news this week? If you did, you might have seen that the Mega Millions jackpot got to $1.2 billion. Some person in Illinois won that on Friday. And if you ever played the lottery, what you're really buying, you're throwing your money away, but only half of your money, because half of it goes to schools, and that's a good thing. So, but what you're buying is the opportunity to dream. What you're buying is that for however long it takes until you find out that you lost, you get to pretend that you may live a different life in the very near future, where you have millions and millions of dollars. And you get to think about what you might spend that money on, and what kind of home you would buy, and what kind of cars you would drive, and what you would say to your boss when you quit on Monday morning. And like all of this, you get to dream about it. And that dreaming is kind of getting at this heart thing that Jesus is getting at. And most of us want to believe that if we won that Mega Millions jackpot, or if we got a big raise, or somebody died and left us a bunch of money, or whatever, that our lives would be substantially better. And Jesus is just saying that's actually not the right way to live, because it isn't true. See, the life that God created you to live, the way that you're wired, the way that God made you, is actually not to be satisfied in money, possessions, wealth, experiences. And because you're not made that way, it doesn't actually work. Look at what Jesus says. Well, let's go back to 19 again. We'll put it on the screen. Here, you're not going to store up treasures on earth. And here's the thing you need to know about treasures on earth. It's kind of easy come, easy go. They're fleeting, right? It says moths and vermin destroy, and thieves can break in and steal. What Jesus is putting his finger on is that earthly treasure, it is always fleeting. It goes away. And it isn't something that can be trusted. It isn't something that you can build your life on. We know this. Like Jesus is pointing out that moths might come and eat your fancy, luxurious clothing that you've saved up for yourself, or a thief could break into your house and steal your stuff and run off with it. We experience this today as well. If you're my age or older, you've lived through at least 2 stock market crashes. You lived through a housing market crash, maybe another one on the horizon. We're now getting to live through inflation. That's kind of fun, right? It's a new one. There's been 10 Bitcoin crashes in the last 6 months. And so you get that things on earth, anything you can put your value in, it can be taken away. And so that's true as well. But there's an aspect of the fleeting nature of earthly possessions. And it gets to one of the big problems with living life for more money and more things. Because earthly treasure is fleeting, like Jesus says, it brings with it stress and anxiety and worry. Because if you have something, you have to protect it. And if you have something, then you know it could go away, you often worry about it. If you have retirement savings, when you start to hear the news about the stock market turning, it does inspire some amount of anxiety, doesn't it? I think one of the easiest ways to think about this is the experience of buying a new car. I don't know if you've ever bought a new car. I've never bought a truly new car, but I've bought many cars that are new to me that I've liked quite a bit. When I turned 16, I bought a Mustang, which I don't know why my parents let me do that, but they did, and I loved that car, and I was really into cars. Somebody rear-ended me in that Mustang eventually, and then I got a newer Mustang, and then I eventually got a Mazda RX-8, which nobody knows what that is, but it was a fun sports car, and I was really into this car. But if you ever have had the experience of buying a car and getting into it that first time after you really have wanted it, you know that it's fun and cool, and you check out all the new things, and it's nicer than your old one, and people notice and they say, "You bought a new car," and you go, "Yes, I did." It's very fun. But then about a week later, it becomes normal, and that joy that you get from getting it mostly goes away. But what doesn't go away is the stress of having a new car, because you are all wigged out about it now. It's like you start parking in the back of parking lots because you don't want anybody to ding up your door. And when your friend gets in, that you pick them up at their house and they have their Frappuccino in your hand, you're like, "No, get that out of my car. It can't be in here." And it brings with it this worry, because you start trying to protect the stuff that you have. Everybody experiences that. When we bought our first house, we needed money for a down payment, and so I ended up selling the RX-8, which is very sad, and I got a 1998 Chevy Cavalier, which was baby blue. We named it Milton, and it had spray paint on one side of it where the guy had scraped against a pole, and to keep it from rusting, he just spray painted the wrong color over where the door had been dinged. And I was super bummed because I had to give up the car that I love for this, but one of the things that came with it was the freedom of not caring at all about that car, not at all. I was opening my door into walls, I was, all kinds of things. And what Jesus is saying is, this is the deal with earthly treasure. It brings with it stress. It brings with it anxiety. It's always fleeting. You're always trying to hang on to it. And so this way of living, it just isn't worth it. You'll hear people say often that money can't make you happy. It's actually not true. Money can make you happy, just not for very long. And the more you pursue something, the more you try to get more and to buy more, you will find moments of happiness, and that will be the thing that keeps you going down that path. But what it can't do is it can't make you satisfied. Okay? The fantasy is that the more money I get, the more satisfied I will be. The reality is that the more of Jesus I get, the more satisfied I will be. See, that's what Jesus wants you to get, and this is what he says in verse 20. Okay, so don't store for yourselves treasure on earth, where it goes away quickly, and you always are trying to hang on to it. Instead, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. You say there's another way of thinking, there's another way of living life. There's another way of handling your finances. Rather than trying to store up for yourself things here, you can use your finances to store up for yourself treasure in heaven. And this is getting to that reality that he wants us to see. The more of Jesus I get, the more satisfied I will be. This is what he means by spiritual treasure, is the spiritual fruit of life with Jesus, of him making you more and more into the kind of person you were created to be. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. This is the spiritual treasure that Jesus is saying you can actually use your money to get that. Now, it's fascinating. I mean, I used to think that treasure in heaven was talking about one day we show up to heaven and Jesus goes, "Here's your treasure," right? And I don't know what it is. I mean, a crown, we have jewels in it, something. And I didn't really get that. I don't know why you need treasure in heaven. I thought it was kind of an all-inclusive deal. But what I realized was that when Jesus says treasure in heaven, he's not talking about the timing of your treasure. He's not primarily saying you can either use your money here and now for things that will go away, or basically you can save up for the future. You can give it away now, and then I'll give you treasure one day when you get to heaven. That's actually not primarily what he's saying. He's talking primarily about the nature of the treasure. He's saying you can either use your stuff for more stuff and for enjoyment right now, or you can do a trade. You can do a transaction. You can give away your earthly treasure, and in return, right now, you can receive spiritual treasure. And it's true that that spiritual treasure will last forever. It has an eternal value to it, but it's not something you have to wait for. It's something you get today. He's saying if you live how I'm inviting you to live with your money, you will actually see spiritual growth take place here and now. You will become the kind of person who trusts God more, who finds more joy in being generous and giving money away. You will become a happier, fuller, satisfied person when you give your money away. And that's what he's trying to get us to see in verse 21. Look at how he concludes this little section. He says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Really fascinating. Pay attention to the order that this comes in. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He could have said, where your heart is, there your treasure will be. that actually is also true. Like, if you show me your bank account and your transactions, I can show you the things that you care about. Where your heart is where you spend your money. But he doesn't just say that. He says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What he's getting at is that what you do with your money actually has the power to affect your heart. If you spend your money on earthly things, don't be surprised that that's where your heart will end up, of wanting more, desiring more stuff, newer stuff, better stuff. But if you use your money for spiritual things, it will actually cause your heart to be there as well. This is one of the hardest things for me to learn early on in my faith as I was coming of age and following Jesus as an adult and not just as a kid in my parents' house. To be honest, money has always been a tricky thing for me spiritually. I am kind of drawn to stuff, if I'm honest. And I went to a Christian private high school where I was around a lot of people with a lot of money who were Christians, and many of them using their money for great things. But I just grew up around a lot of wealthy people, and that became my vision of what kind of the good Christian life was. My idea for myself was that I was going to become a very wealthy person who was going to be generous and was going to serve in church and maybe be an elder one day or something like that, and just, give a lot of money away, but also keep and spend a lot of money on myself, and it was just all going to be great together. And so when I was leaving high school and trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, I had narrowed the possible fields for my career down to things that made a lot of money and that didn't require me to go to school for 10 years. So doctor was out, but I started off thinking engineer. Engineers make decent money, and so I did that for a quarter, and then I realized that I was way more social than all the other people in the engineering class and didn't like hanging out with them very much, and no offense to the engineers in the room. I'm sure you're not that way. So I dropped that, and then I wasn't really sure, but lawyer sounded pretty good. Lawyers make pretty good money, and you have to go to school for a little bit longer, but not the full 10 years, and so I was really excited about that. But over years, what God just was very patiently working on me in was that if I took money out of the equation, it was just obvious that he made me for ministry. It's what I loved doing. I loved teaching. I loved volunteering in the church and leading small groups and discipling people and all of that, and it was what I was passionate about. It was what I spent all my free time doing. I just wasn't considering ministry because it didn't make a lot of money. And eventually, God got through, and I realized that was a really dumb thing to do, that making a decision for your career based on money and not what actually God created you to do was dumb. And so I gave in and changed my major to ministry and started pursuing that track. And right away, God just gave me the gift of an experience that changed my whole perspective on money. The first quarter of my junior year, right when I decided to go into ministry, I studied abroad in Guatemala for 3 months. And it was an amazing experience. But part of that study abroad was an internship. And so you got to sign up for what kind of internship you wanted. For some people, they were doing micro loans, and so accountants and finance people were doing internships in that program. And for some people, there was medical stuff you could do, and there were internships there. But there was a ministry internship, and where you got to be with the pastor of the small village that we were going to be in for 6 weeks while we were there. So a really, really poor village up in the mountains, and I decided to do the ministry internship because that's what I wanted to do with my life. And so this is me. And so embarrassing that I ever wore that. But this is me with the pastor right here. And so for 6 weeks, I shadowed the pastor in the ministry internship. And it turns out that what the ministry internship was being the town veterinarian. Who knew? It turns out this guy preached on Sundays, and Monday through Saturday was the veterinarian. And so we did stuff like building pigsties. And I was going through these photos, and I realized there's a lot of photos of people working and me standing nearby. I'm not sure I did much, but I did at least cut one board. I have proof of that. So we were building stuff for these families, and then one really memorable thing that we got to do as a veterinarian was castrate pigs. That's me, castrating a pig. You will never forget the sound of a pig being castrated if you hear it. I hope you never have to hear it. So this was my ministry internship. And I didn't learn a lot about church ministry, but I did learn a lot about life. And, in my 6 weeks there, and this is really cliche, some of you have had these kind of experiences in your travels, God just gave me a different perspective. You see, I had this view back home that there were people who had a lot of money and that those people could be generous. And then there were people like me who didn't. And from an American perspective, I didn't have a lot of money. My job was riding a bicycle that towed a billboard behind it. I made $17 an hour. I didn't have much, so I thought. And yet, in 6 weeks there, doing ministry with families who really had nothing, these microloans, people were having their lives changed because somebody was willing to loan them $50 that they didn't have and they couldn't get. And if somebody would loan them $50, then for the first time, they could invest in an animal or a seed for their farm or whatever, and it would change their lives, $50. And I just started to realize that I was rich, that from the perspective of any rational person who could look at the world, I, even as a broke college student, had far more than these families I was with would ever have, and that if I didn't see myself as rich now, I probably never would. The thing about money is we just always compare ourselves to the people who are around us, and typically we find people who have a little bit more than we do, and we cast those people as the wealthy people. We're normal, and then we find somebody who has a little bit less than us, and they're the poor people. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. Everybody just sees the world that way, and you always are normal to yourself. And so I really felt God challenging me to think about what it means to be generous, to recognize that he has given me far more than I need, and that even though I don't have as much money as some people do, I still get to be called to be generous with what he has given me. And as I was wrestling with that in Guatemala, just one of the commitments that I made to the Lord on that trip, and it's something that my wife and I have lived by ever since, is that every time God gives us more money, we will be more generous with it than what we've been in the past. So, when we move up in means and quality of life and all of that, we're not first going to think about what we can buy ourselves. The first thing we're going to do is say, how can we be more generous than we've been before with this extra money coming in? And it's been one of the best things for my heart that we've ever done. And the reason is because it's actually through generosity that we get to experience the goodness of God in our life and we actually grow as people with spiritual treasure, spiritual growth, spiritual goodness, and not just people who want more stuff. And that's basically what Jesus says here as he talks about the healthy eye and the unhealthy eye. So it's a kind of a weird passage. You heard Luke read it earlier. I'm just going to read it again. What he says in verse 22 is that the eye is the lamp of the body. And if your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And we read that and we just have no clue what Jesus is talking about. It seems like a detour where we've stopped talking about money and now we're talking about eyesight. And yet, Jesus' audience would have understood it very well because in the Greek and in that language, healthy was kind of a euphemism for generosity. And unhealthy was kind of a euphemism for stingy. So what Jesus is saying is that if you have a generous eye, then you will be full of light. And if you have a stingy eye, you'll be full of darkness. And what he's talking about is the way we view the world. If you look at the world with a generous take, if you look for opportunities to bless people with what God has given you, if you trust that God has blessed you with enough now and he will in the future, that you don't have to hold on to control for yourself, you can give money away knowing that God will keep on taking care of you in the future, you're going to be full of light. And remember, light for Jesus is this metaphor for his kingdom, for experiencing the life that he wants you to experience. You're going to experience more of Jesus if you can be generous. But if you have a stingy eye, if you have a scarcity mindset, if you look around the world thinking, what can I get for myself? How can I protect what I have? How can I not lose the things I've worked for? Then Jesus says, you're going to be full of darkness. And how great is that darkness going to be? What we do with our finances, it actually has the power to affect us spiritually. And the reason why money has that power, the reason why it's such a big deal, is because money is really about power. See, what money is, it is the ability to affect change in the world. With your dollars, you can provide food for yourself and your family and shelter. With your dollars, you can save up to provide for your future. You can go on trips. You can buy the new iPhone when it comes out. Like, you can change your world through money. That's why it's so alluring. And the reason why money is such a big deal spiritually is because Jesus invites us to live as people who primarily trust God as our Father, as the one who's going to care for our lives, who's going to do the things that we need to survive, to trust that He's going to give us every good gift, that He's going to take care of our future. And what money does is it competes with God for that place. See, this is the problem that Jesus wants you to get. If you accept His reality that more money is not going to make your life better, that more of Jesus is going to make your life better, then you have to recognize this problem. The problem is that money is always competing with Jesus for your heart. Money is always trying to be the thing that you trust to take care of yourself. Where you think, man, what do I need to have a good life? What do I need to have a future that I can depend on? Money is trying to be that rather than God. And so because that is true, Jesus is going to tell us one of the hardest things, which is that you have to pick one. This is how he ends this section in this passage in verse 24. It says, no one can serve two masters. I'm going to read that again. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. See, if you trust money for your well-being, if you trust money for your future, by definition, you are not trusting God for that. And so Jesus says, you just got to pick. And most of us, we just ignore this. I don't know any Christian or really any person who, given this option, if Jesus says, hey, you can't serve both God and money, you got to pick one. I don't know of anybody who would go, let's go with money. I'm gonna choose money. Like, nobody says that. But what most of us do is we just ignore what Jesus is saying here, and we decide to pursue both at the same time. We decide that we really can give our heart fully to God, and yet we can also pursue everything this world has to offer, and riches and experiences and possessions and all of that, and we think we can do it both, and Jesus just says, you can't. If you choose both, what you're choosing is money. Because as you get more and as you pursue more, it will draw your heart to those things. And so, knowing that, Jesus invites us to something else. And this is kind of the big point. In Jesus' kingdom, He invites us to exchange our earthly treasure for spiritual treasure. What you do to fight greed, what you do to grow spiritually, is you take the earthly treasure that Jesus has given you and you live generously with it. You give it away. You give to support His kingdom and church ministry. You give to support people in need in your life. You look for opportunities to bless people with what you've been given. And in doing that, you will experience the spiritual treasure of knowing and trusting Jesus more. So what does that practically look like? And this is the hardest part. What does it look like to be a generous person? For a lot of people, this is where the idea of tithing comes in. And the thing with boiling down generosity to tithing that's problematic is kind of twofold. One, by the way, tithing is a word that just means giving 10% of what you make. And it's a well-established tradition in the church and in the Bible of giving 10%, your first 10% to God. But the problem with thinking that that's what it means to be generous is first that when you read the Old Testament, God's people were actually asked to give quite a bit more than 10%. The tithe was one aspect of it, but it wasn't the whole thing. And when you add it all up, it's really closer to 22 or 23% that God was asking His people to give. But then the other problem is just that Jesus never makes it that simple. See, we all want just really simple, give me the number, Jesus, and I'll do it, and then I can just spend the rest of my money how I want to. And Jesus always keeps money in the realm of the heart. He always keeps it as a heart of generosity, a heart of self-sacrifice. And what's so complicated about that is that no one can answer for you what it means to be generous. You have to answer that between you and Jesus. You have to actually daily, monthly, yearly ask the question, God, what do you want with the stuff that you've entrusted to me? where are you calling me to be generous? And it's going to look differently for different people. For some of you, you are having a hard time just living right now, just putting food on the table. I mean, we're doing ministry every week with neighbors in our compassion center, and truly just to survive is difficult. And 10% is maybe way beyond what's even feasible. But there's also some of you where 10% isn't actually nearly generous enough. When we think about the fact that God's people in the Old Testament were being asked to give 22, 23% of what they had, I mean, they were subsistence farmers. They were poor. We live in one of the wealthiest societies ever, and we experience a level of comfort and a quality of life that has been completely unattainable to almost everybody who's ever lived. And so I think one of the challenges for us is knowing that that's where God has called us to be as a people right now, is what does generosity look like in that context? And it's not as simple as just writing a check for 10% of what you make and then not thinking about it again. I wonder where God is calling you to be generous right now. Alderwood has been blessed so much through the generosity of our people for decades and decades. As long as I've been a part of this church, our finances have been healthy here because people like you have followed Jesus' teaching, have lived generously, have given away. And I want to invite you to continue that. Maybe you're somebody who doesn't have any practices of generosity in your life right now, or at least serious sacrificial generosity. And I just want you to hear the invitation of Jesus, that the reason why God invites you to live that way is not because he needs your money. We don't need your money. The reason he invites you to live that way is because he knows that that is one of the things that's going to actually give you the kind of satisfying life that he created you for. When you use your money for God's good, he gives you spiritual treasure in return, and it's a pretty good deal. But I also wonder what opportunities for generosity God's giving you right now that go beyond just giving money to the church, which we're grateful for. I think for me, one of the things I've realized is that I actually can be really consistent in my giving and still struggle to maintain that healthy eye, that generous outlook. And so we've tried to put practices in our life to just continually remind ourselves of God's goodness and generosity to us. And I wonder what that might look like for you. One of the things we've done at times in our family is set aside money every month just for giving that doesn't have an end to it that we know of, but just to have money available to be able to say yes to a need that God brings us. And so if a family in our life group is in need, we can say yes easily because we have that money available. Or if a ministry opportunity comes up that's a new one that we feel like God wants us to support, we just have that available. That's one thing you can do. One thing I'd encourage you to do is as you give every month to whatever you give to, whether it's this ministry or it's other ministries, to just pray every month as you send that money out so that you would remember the tie between what you do with your finances and your spiritual health. That's one of the downsides of auto pay, is it can happen just mindlessly. And so, that's one thing that you could do, is just say, when we give, we're going to pray, we're going to ask God to use this for his kingdom and his purposes, and we're going to ask him what else he has for us. I don't know what that is, but I do know for you, generosity is one of the absolutely most important things you can do to grow as a follower of Jesus. Jesus says, you trust me with your money. You trust me with your finances, even when it's painful. And I promise you, I'm going to give you spiritual treasure in return. And I know that I want that for myself, and I want it for you. Would you stand with me? Let's pray. Lord, you are good to us, and we're grateful. And you take care of us in ways that we know of and ways we don't even know of, because you see everything. And Lord, we trust that you are a good father who loves to give good gifts to your children. And so we want to live that way. We want to live with an outlook that says, I don't have to protect all my stuff. I don't have to fight for myself, because I have a Father in heaven who loves me and who takes care of me. So God, help us to be a generous church, not just with the ministry here that you're doing, but with our neighbors and with our family, with everybody you bring into our life. May we be people who give freely and joyfully because we know how much you've already given to us. Lord, we want more of you. We want a life that really matters, not one that can be bought. And so we ask you to keep working in our hearts. Amen. Let's just